Hi and welcome. My name is Lena Sanchez and I'm with the Fruita Area Chamber of Commerce. Today's Business Toolbox is regarding navigating conflict in the workplace, presented by Alicia Saunders, a human resources consultant with BBSI. Before we get started, I just want to address a few housekeeping rules. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for members who have registered for the presentation. We will keep everybody on mute during the presentation. If you have a question, please type it in the chat box and send it to either myself, Kayla, or Rick Voss. Then at the end of the presentation, we will open it up for questions. So please hold on to questions not directly related to the presentation until the very end. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Alicia. Alicia, welcome and thank you for hosting this Business Toolbox with us today. Please take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Alicia Saunders. I'm an HR consultant here at BBSI in Grand Junction. My background is been about 10 years in the HR industry with both large and small scale oil and gas companies, as well as private practice medical. Looking forward to talking with you today about workplace conflict. It's definitely something that everybody goes through, and it's something that having some tools in your toolkit can help you be successful as you navigate through conflict with yourself or with employees. So I will share my screen. Perfect. All right, so we're gonna talk about 45 minutes or so about how you can navigate workplace conflict. And this is going to be something, where conflict can be scary. It's often something that brings out fear, anger, feelings of frustration, but it's a conflict as part of life. It is something that you see every day. You see it often in our news, you see it in sports, you see it in levels of our government, you see it in the workplace, but it's something where one team wins and one team loses, and you don't want that to enter into your situation with your workplace. But it's often a very unpleasant thing to experience. You are either in the fight or you're watching the fight, or you have to manage through the fight. In everyday life, how do you think people handle conflict? There's many different ways that people handle it, and some of the most common are avoiding the person you're angry or upset with. Avoidance is something that happens a lot. Or you tell other people about how you feel about that person or what they did to you. You're looking for, shared interest in that. You're looking for what other people think. Potentially you could yell at that person, or maybe more. You feel victimized, feeling bad, feeling angry, upset about what has happened, or watching your employees go through that. And then you can also get help from other people. So some people reach out to mediators, lawyers, other people, their managers, and ask for help in the conflict. So, overall, most people hate conflict. And that's something that we all have in common. So I want to start with a story about conflict that I've experienced with two employees at a past workplace. So these two employees went to training together. So they were both new hires at the same time in this training. Both individuals had very different backgrounds, different working backgrounds. So when they got to training, they had a disagreement about who was going to take what place on a crew. So this crew was going to be made up of multiple different people, and they each felt like they brought something better to the table than the other person did. And so they had some disagreements back and forth with each other about who might be better than the other one, or who has more training than the other individual. And they each individually went to a supervisor and told the supervisor, I'm having conflict with this employee, here's what my thing is. And unfortunately, the manager avoided the conflict. He told each individual, well, of course you're the better one. He told each person that they were the one that was going to be put in a higher spot on the crew. So now each one of those individuals is empowered a little bit that their position is a little better than the other. And it played off for another 2 weeks until they came back to Grand Junction and went to another training session where they both stood up, started arguing with each other, and one individual ended up standing up and throwing a chair at the other person. And that all happened because it was a conflict at the beginning that wasn't handled properly, and it ended up, in a situation that was terminable but potentially criminal. And getting to that end piece, what could that manager have done different? What could those employees have done different? That mismanagement of that initial conflict. So keep that scenario in mind. We're going to talk a little bit more through that one, what could have been done differently, and through the different things that I'm going to talk about through the presentation. Let's talk about some assumptions with conflict. So a lot of people assume that harmony is normal and conflict is abnormal, and that's completely untrue. So a lot of times people feel fear and guilt when they hit that conflict level. So, but it is not, harmony is not always normal. Conflicts and disagreements are the same. So that is also an assumption. So conflict is actually more serious. So disagreements can be solved by communication changes. So clarifications, talking with people. We make a mountain out of a molehill, essentially, when you go through this way. And then conflict is a result of pathology. So sometimes when there's conflict going on, we assume that people have issues, and they're hostile, they're whining. These are labels we put on people. So the issues in the conflict are not necessarily the element of their personality, but it's something, if somebody brings us a personality that we feel uncomfortable with, we're just not sure, we just don't like them, that can be a result of pathology. And then conflict should never be escalated. A lot of people are always taught, handle your conflict right here, right now with somebody, don't talk to somebody else about it. The kind of parenting situation, now let's sit down and talk, you two, that kind of comes into play. But sometimes it should be escalated. It should be taken to somebody else to look at it. Another assumption is that conflict management is polite and orderly. It can be sloppy, it can be messy, it can take several times talking with people to get to the root of the conflict or to get to a resolution. And then anger is the predominant emotion. Sometimes it's not anger at all. It can be just a feeling of sad. It can be being afraid. Sometimes fear brings out conflict in people. So a lot of times it's not anger. And then the last assumption, there's many assumptions, but the last one we'll talk about is that there's only one right way to solve a conflict. So sometimes every option can be the right way, but just working with people to foster that relationship, what works best for this individual relationship or this individual conflict. So assumptions often contribute to negative conflict. So negative conflict is a specific type. So we're going to talk about negative. We'll also talk about positive conflict here in a little bit. But when you are involved in negative conflict, you're going to be committed to a position. So this means that there's a disagreement on an issue. For example, when two people go to court, one person stands on one side and one person stands on the other side, and they see it completely differently. One person wins and one person loses. That's going to be negative. Or unequal commitment. What this is when tension builds up and one person feels that the other person is not putting as much time or energy into a relationship. That is when, think about it when you're at work, somebody calls in sick, and so somebody else has to take over for them. Or if somebody calls in sick and then posts on Instagram that they're whitewater rafting with their family, that is like an unequal commitment to work. That can cause negative conflict in the workplace. When they return, you may feel frustrated that that person did what they did, and they could see that off of your body language, how you treat them, how you interact with them. Issue proliferation, that's my favorite word for the day. It means that the conflict is huge, but it started when somebody let somebody down. So that's kind of going back to my original story. That was such a small piece of that puzzle, but when it when it festered, when it got bigger and bigger and people didn't take action on it in the beginning, it now is a large point of contention. And then the escalatory use of destructive tactics. So these tactics are telling somebody to forget about it, telling somebody that they, if you're snippy in a meeting with somebody, telling somebody that their side of the fight is not accurate, but coming off with destructive tactics during a conflict. It's important to note that destructive tactic is actually fighting. People verbally yelling, physical altercations, but it not only affects those people, but it affects the people who have to witness the disagreement or the fight. And it has people can stay in a perpetual state of fear after having either witnessed the conflict or been a part of the conflict. And it manifests how we talk to each other. So poor communication is often how negative conflict contributes to poor communication in the workplace. More often than not, poor communication is the reason why we have conflict. It's a lack of clarity of what resulting in wasted time and energy. So it's a lack of clarity as to what the other individual wants. We don't communicate clearly when we're under stress. We don't communicate clearly when there's a lot of emotion. And so people often misunderstand what is intended. So misunderstandings that further damage relationships. Knowledge transfer is tough and it takes longer to do when people are in conflict. When there's no trust, there is no open communication. When communication breaks down, often people don't know why they're doing things, and that's really important. So when two people are in conflict with each other, they often do things that aren't the norm for them as an individual. And morale on the team drops. This is really important for managers to keep in mind when they're witnessing, conflict between employees or when they have conflict with employees. That morale drop can lead to turnover. And that's really important for people to remember. Turnover is huge within an organization, especially small business. It can lead to a lot of issues. And then teams often don't focus on the customer. When your employees or you and an employee are too busy focusing on the conflict that you're having with each other, the customer experience goes down. It can ultimately harm the business. So it's hard to get work done if you're working in an environment where you don't feel that conflict is heard or conflict is fixed. The root cause of a lot of conflict is broken trust. So you think of your personal situations where you feel conflict happening, and the force driving it mostly is trust and communication. So let's talk about communicating in conflict. So it often feels unresolvable. It is something you don't really want to. It kind of goes back to the beginning. You're avoiding conflict, or you're talking to other people but not talking to the person you're having a conflict with. Fear holds us back from taking that first initial step to resolve conflict. You worry that the other person's going to reject the desire for change, or that they're going to fight, or they're going to have a reaction that you don't want. But more often than not, the other person is feeling the same exact fear. They may be stuck in a situation where they have negative emotions with it, but they also avoid each other. So conflict happens. It's a part of life. It is something it's impossible to avoid. So if we look at these different ways of communicating through conflict, you can take a different turn, a different aspect into what you're doing here. So the first one is to speak your mind and your heart. So the person listening to you will really want to change if you're able to accurately project what you're feeling and what you're saying. But also you want to listen well. And so listen well is the key to diffusing situations. It means you have to stop, listen without judging, understand and acknowledge what you've heard. So there's the important saying of the old saying, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And so you have 2 ears to hear and only 1 mouth to talk. And so what you're putting on listening, it has to be twice as important as what you're saying. Changing the situation from a negative to positive through that active listening. You want to express strong feelings appropriately. So as mentioned earlier, you have to be calm. There's no room for defensiveness, name calling, and other ways that you go back into this conflict mode. So figuring out how you feel before you start talking, but then having a commitment to express those feelings appropriately. Remain rational as long as possible. If you get worked up during the conversation, you won't listen. Your body language is going to tell the other person that you're not really open to changing anything. But your feelings are valid. So, take a break, go outside, go to a place where you're calm, and then try again. Summarize and ask questions. This kind of goes back to the active listening point. So there's an extension of listening. You summarize what you heard from the other person. So asking those questions. I hear you saying that you don't like the way I interacted in this meeting. Well, tell me how that is. Or if I hear you saying this correctly, then, and kind of reiterating what people are saying. This gives them a chance to clarify anything, but also really builds the trust value that you are listening to their feelings. You are listening to what they have to say about the situation. You want to give and take. So in conflict, there's always two sides to every story. There's always going to be the side that you have, the side that someone else has, and there actually may be quite a bit of middle ground. You can apologize, you can compromise, but remember that any of that means you're moving forward. So both sides have to agree to what to do next. And then you want to avoid harmful statements. So avoid using the word you in your comments because it often leads to a verbal vision of you pointing your finger at somebody else. It will make the other person defensive. So you want to use words like, I hear you saying this, and not you said this. It makes it sound different to people. But sometimes people get caught up in the I am right and you are wrong. And you have to convince the person that there is middle ground with it. The goal here is to de-escalate conflict and not win. And that's something everybody has to remember. So if you treat the person with respect and listen, you ultimately rebuild that trust that they might see. They might learn that what is wrong in the situation, but they may have to figure that out by themselves. And that is something to keep in mind. Let's talk about positive conflict. So I mentioned before that conflict is a part of life and it can't be avoided. So when could conflict be positive? And it happens when we work through issues in a positive way. They're all great possibilities in the workplace when issues pop up that individuals can trust each other enough to work through them constructively, professionally, and respectfully. Working through conflict is a positive life skill, and it moves the piece of fear out. So positive conflict looks like everybody gets a positive regard among the disputants. So everybody who is in the disagreement has a positive regard for the other people. There is the absence of threats. We talked a little bit about that, expressing strong feelings appropriately on the last slide. So everybody has the absence of threats and the positive regard for others. Everybody wants a win-win situation. And this can happen in the workplace when everybody has that trust built and can have these conversations with each other. And then a commitment to a positive outcome is equal. So finally, what do we want in the end? We want a positive outcome. And this may mean someone wins, this may mean someone loses, but everybody comes together at the very end and the outcome is equal for all. Let's talk about managing conflict. So this is something for a manager when he or she sees a conflict with two employees. So this happens quite a bit in the workplace. Two people can come to you, you can hear about it third party, you can, sometimes even you see it happening right in front of you. So a manager can take the steps to take immediate action. That's really important. That is one thing in my original story that manager did not do. If he had taken immediate action with those two employees and sat them down and told them, hey, here's why we're going to put you where we're going to put you on the team, they both could understand what was being seen in them to each other. But taking immediate action to resolve the conflict. So an early response minimizes tension. It keeps other employees out of the disagreement, and miscommunications are resolved simply and transparently. If you let something fester in the workplace between two employees, oftentimes other employees join one person's side or the other side, and it becomes a much larger issue than if you had taken immediate action with it. You want to frame the discussion positively. So don't refer to meetings as conflict resolution. I've seen that before. Instead, you're going to want to meet with employees, call it brainstorming or a chat session, or just simply let them know that you want to have a talk to talk about their opinions on the matter. You want to focus on the issue and not the person. So you want to encourage both parties to avoid personal attacks and then focus on the problem solving. Again, active listening. I think that's a pretty common theme throughout the presentation. So let each party speak without interruption. If one person keeps talking out of turn, as the supervisor, as the manager, saying, well, we've got to stop, let the other person talk. Or, if you need to remove somebody from the room, just making sure that each individual knows that they'll have their time to speak and letting the person say exactly what they need to say. Again, fear sometimes, a lot of times in conflict, somebody may be afraid to say what they need to say in front of the other person. So let them speak without the interruption. If things get heated, ask them to clarify why they're getting upset about things. Let them talk about what is that doing to them on a personal level. And then ask for proposed solutions. This is my favorite part. So ask for opinions and encourage a consensus on a solution. Say, okay, so I see how this conflict is happening. What would you like to see in the end? And let both individuals tell you what would be the positive outcome for each one of them. A lot of times it's the same thing. And so making sure each individual comes up with what would they like to see happen. It's important to build that trust and allow people to have those open conversations. So being a manager and how to manage those conflicts really goes hand in hand with conflict resolution skills. These are skills that a supervisor can have, but you can also have this on an individual basis. So dealing with conflict in personal situations, but having these conflict resolution skills are really key. So communication. Clear and accurate communication is essential for making people feel heard. So it ensures all parties know what's expected going forward. So having good communication skills is important if you're going to be involved in any conflict resolution. Emotional intelligence. So this is understanding one's feelings and the feelings of others so you minimize and you resolve conflicts. So understanding how you feel about situations is growing your emotional intelligence. Watching how other people react to things is understanding their emotions. So that's definitely a skill that you can build when you need to have conflict resolution. So empathy kind of goes alongside with that. So that's seeing the other person's point of view. So this is seeing them, it can reduce resentments and stubbornness, and it can also increase innovation and learning. So if you have empathy towards another person's situation, you can understand where they're coming from. You may have to ask clarifying questions here, but growing your sense of empathy is a skill that you will take with you through lots of different situations. And then problem solving. So good problem solvers listen, and they also find solutions that help with differing parties agree and cooperate. So this skill is learned by going through this process. If you avoid all conflict, you're never going to learn how to problem solve. And so that's really good for a supervision. So how to improve that? Practice active listening. So listen without interrupting, ask thoughtful, open-ended questions to better understand somebody's point of view, making eye contact when you're speaking with people, and then being clear and concise. Be aware of your body language, be aware of how you're speaking and how you're speaking to others and how it comes across. You may even want to try practicing with somebody. So if you have a trusted friend or colleague, talk to them about the situation and then ask, how could I improve my communication skills? Maintaining a positive attitude. So controlling your emotional response is maintaining that positive attitude, and it can keep discussions calm and productive. So something I've seen in the workplace is if there's two employees that are having conflict with each other, and the manager comes in and that manager is very aggressive or is unwilling to hear the different sides, those people are not going to trust to ever come back with that situation. Maintaining that positive attitude, we're going to come to a conclusion here, and kind of getting that out of employees can foster that environment within an office or within a business. So you also want to work towards the outcome. So conflict is only resolved when parties emerge with an agreed upon plan of actions. So keeping discussions going towards achieving that goal, and then writing action steps. It can be very simple, but ensuring all parties agree and understand how to move forward, that is how you're going to end that conflict. So I've got some effective workplace strategies to manage workplace conflict specifically. So if, say there's an individual at your work who you have a conflict with, or you see has a conflict with somebody else, the biggest thing you want to do is to craft an invitation to meet. This is how you want to take the initiative to connect with your coworker or with your employees. So you want to send an invitation to them. That can be texting now, calling them, getting together with somebody, or even sending an email to somebody saying, hey, I want to meet with you and talk about a situation. This can be, where you introduce yourself as an empathetic person. I understand we're having an issue with this. Let's meet up and talk about it. You want to humanize that message. That is going to be, I understand, would it be possible for us to meet? Asking that person in a way that they want to meet with you to discuss the conversation. You want to review carefully before you send it off. Sometimes waiting an hour or two before you send a message to somebody, before you pick up that phone and make that call, and see how you feel about the situation. It may have already resolved itself. And so if you look at it with fresh eyes, sometimes you'll see a different point of view. So if you're upset with a coworker and you want to talk to them, wait a couple hours before you ask to do that. Choose a neutral location. Asking somebody, hey, can we go get coffee? Can we take a walk? That's also, and it also takes away any outside influences. So if you're going to have a chat with somebody that you work with, or somebody that you're having a conflict with, you want to make sure that person is trusting of the situation. So they don't want to get called into a meeting where they don't know the other people inside the room. They don't know if what they're going to say is going to be taken out of there. But you want to have a constructive conversation. So sometimes that can be in a neutral location. And then you want to approach the conversation strategically. You want to consider your coworker or your employee's interests and potential point of view, and try and find alignment with them. Be prepared to listen strategically. Pull out pieces of what they're saying and say, okay, you are saying that you don't like the hours that you're being given here. How can we change that? Asking them to come back and tell you how to fix it. When it's your turn in the conversation, find ways to share your own perspective, but in a way that bridges gaps. This is where supervisors and managers, owners of businesses can say things like, I have been in your shoes before, and this is what I did. Or I may not be able to fix this problem, but how can we solve it for something else in the future? It's taking it from a conflict to a productive stage. Where can we go from here? Results of positive conflict and effective communication. Everybody knows what they should be doing. It's really important when you get large groups together, talking to people. Everybody knows what they're going to be doing. And especially if you come to an end of a conflict with two individuals, they both know what's expected of them. There's an understanding of why people do the work and how it fits the goals. So if you get together with two employees and each one of them disagrees with a project, they each know how it's going to fit into the goal of the business. People have information they need to do the job. It's important. It's really important here. It kind of goes back to my story. We had those two individuals who had the same goal. They wanted to work there. They knew what it took to get the job done, but they had a disagreement on how they were going to get there. That manager could have taken those two employees together and told them, here's the reason why we're doing what we're doing. You know, let's talk about how you're feeling about the situation. And they could have gotten to that point where they didn't have to escalate it to a point of any sort of, you know, a workplace violence situation. You want to talk and have ideas and feedback to improve performance. So if somebody comes to you and says, I really don't like the way you handled that, as a manager, you should welcome that feedback. That is something you can take to grow. And then people learn quicker when they have positive conflict. People learn how to approach situations differently. Problems are solved quickly and effectively when everybody communicates on the same level. Everybody has that positive communication. And then organizations are flexible and your customers see it. So if something needs to be changed, as a supervisor, you come out of a conflict situation where a good idea is brought forth. You can change that within your organization. If it's a pinch point for your employees, you can start to see that and you can start to adjust things as needed. So finally here, I have some practical applications that you can take with you today. These are things that you can take in your workplace. These can be between a conflict with you and someone else. These can be a conflict with your employees. This can even be a personal situation. But the biggest thing is don't avoid the really hard conversations. If something has to be said, have that conversation. Avoidance leads to things ballooning out, getting lots bigger than they have to be. You need to clarify what the conflict is truly about. It can be about something very, very small that has just gotten bigger, or it's about something that can be easily talked through in a situation. You want to mutually establish common goals to resolve that conflict. So get together with the person you're having conflict with and decide what your goals are, and then mutually decide to go to that point to resolve it. And then acknowledge the agreed upon solution and determine the responsibilities each party has in that resolution. So if two people have to work in different shifts, everybody needs to determine their responsibility and what they had in that conflict and how they can move forward to making resolution. And I want to open the floor. I don't know, did we get any chat questions? Talk about we could talk about situations, we can look at different things.
So I don't see any chat questions, but if anybody would like to submit a question that comes up, I did get feedback that it's an excellent presentation. And I definitely agree with that. You had a lot of great tips, especially I loved the one of not saying you or like you always do this. I think that's a really good one. Somebody asked, do you do any staff trainings?
Let Luke, do you want to?
Sure, absolutely. BBSI, we love partnering with business owners, and we have, for our clients, we can do trainings. If you're interested in something or have something specific, we can talk. But yes, definitely with our clients, we're able to do different trainings.
Awesome. So I did have one question that I thought of. Years ago, I worked in an organization where the manager wasn't very, they avoided conflict a lot. So how would you recommend somebody that maybe the employees have conflict and they take it to a manager and the manager tells them, just work it out among yourselves. I don't care how you do it, just work it out. How would you approach a situation like that?
Sure. I think that's a situation where employees can take it upon themselves to have those meetings. If a manager says, oh, work it out amongst yourselves, that's where two employees then can take that time if they need to take a walk together, get some coffee, hit neutral ground, and talk things out. I think that's where strong management and strong supervisors come into play. Not avoiding it. Avoiding it causes things to get much, much larger. But yeah, I think just taking personal ownership in conflict is really important. And so if you are an employee at an organization and your manager says just handle it, then I think that's what you should do, and having those active listening skills. And I wish more people thought about that, when they went into a conflict. It's not a win-lose situation. You can really turn it into a win-win.
Awesome. And then
I would add a little commentary to that as well. just from the perspective of, if you were the boss of that manager who says, go handle it, sometimes managers need to be able to deal with conflict, and other times it's appropriate to pass it on. So if the manager is pushing off things that they should be addressing, then it's a conversation. Now that conflict of lack of handling conflict has now become a conflict. And ultimately you're paying that manager to help make the workplace productive, help make employees enable them to do their job. So sometimes it is a conversation at that point of, hey manager, this is part of what you're paid to, is to help navigate that conflict. So as a manager of that other person who's pushing it off, just being a gate, understanding what's right for that scenario. And if they're totally avoiding it just because they don't like it, that maybe is a situation definitely to grasp and run with, and have a expectation setting conversation to help eliminate it down the road.
Awesome.
Yes. Thanks, Luke. Yeah, I really agree with that. I think a lot of managers aren't given the tools to be successful managers. They are promoted and they've never been told, here's how you handle conflict, or, here's some tools for your tool belt of how to do it. And so, yeah, I definitely agree with that.
And then as a follow-up question, what happens if the two staff members do meet outside of work and things get out of hand and there's an altercation? How should a business handle something like that?
Yikes. Yeah, that's definitely something that could happen. I think that's where the manager has to come into play. That's where the manager is going to set the expectation for the employees. That is going to be something that ownership has to take, ownership, supervision, management, all has to take into account. They're going to have to hold those employees accountable. That's really important. Setting the tone for how the workplace works, what they're looking for, and then what they expect out of those employees.
And another thing to keep in mind with that one, Marissa, is the idea of four walls. If it's at work and it's within your four walls, whether it's a personal issue that's brought into those four walls, and again, four walls is figurative, but if outside business comes into work, it then becomes a workplace issue. Similarly, if things escalate at work, but there's an altercation specifically, you said like outside of the workplace, there's not a lot of control you have of how people live their lives outside of the workplace. And that's where, unfortunately, if things aren't handled well within work, it may need to be escalated to the police department. And that may be something you're not calling the police on the employees, but as individuals who, although they work for you, have an altercation outside of work, sometimes it is better to hand that over to an appropriate authority. But the goal, again, is handle it at work, address it early and often, and don't be afraid to have the hard conversation, because you don't want, of course, we don't want employees having to have authorities get involved outside of work for something that could have easily been taken care of at work. So again, each situation is a little bit different, but I would definitely encourage address it early, address it often, take care of it, so that way it doesn't escalate and become an altercation outside of work.
Thank you so much for, helping me with the scenario. Not that that has happened, but I don't want something like that to happen, because I think a lot of times you're exactly right. It comes down to that, having that hard conversation. And I think passing that on to the managers, that if you don't address it, this could potentially happen. So thanks for the input.
And one other thing to add to that, Marissa, I think having that honest conversation of why we address it early, why we address it often, is because if we allow it to get outside of workplace and it's handled outside of that, it's totally out of your control as an employer at that point. Now you may have someone who, heaven forbid, but they have a physical altercation and maybe they're criminal charges, or they end up in jail for a night. And at that point, it's affecting your workplace because you're down a person, there's morale issues. All of that is now out of your control. Whereas if you handle it within your four walls, you're taking control of what you have control of. And as soon as it walks out the door, you lose control of it as an owner at that point, or business representative.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
Then I have a question. How can a manager manage people that have different personality types? Or maybe it's a conflict where the people they really don't get along, and their conflict is, I just feel like so-and-so just doesn't like me and they're always kind of rude to me, or something like that.
Yeah, I think this one happens a lot. And we all come from different backgrounds. And so coming into an organization, you're hired for your skills, but you bring along everything else that you have with you. And so sitting down as a manager, sitting down with two employees and getting to the root of, I think this person just doesn't like me. Well, let's talk about that. Let's ask the other person, what is the fundamental issue here, and kind of getting to the core, asking those clarifying questions, having somebody say exactly how they feel and allowing that person to say what they need to say in a safe environment. Getting to that point where you have, okay, you guys disagree on what time people need to show up. I think about this one a lot. There's a lot of people who say 15 minutes early is on time. And then you have a group of people that say coming into work is on time. Those people are never going to see eye to eye on that. But if you get them together and say, okay, this person may have other things in their life that means that they can't get to work 15 minutes early, or these people, they get there early because that's something that they've been taught in their past, so something that's been instilled in them. And but getting people together and having that open line of communication and allowing people to say exactly kind of fundamentally, here's the issue here, and getting to work on that. There's going to be an outcome, and what that is, it is depending on what those people are willing to share and what they're willing to say in those situations.
And it sounds like a great plug for something down the road of managing performance. You can't be a good manager if you don't know your people. So understanding what role, the personalities, you're right, everyone's different. Understand the personalities. For the folks, sometimes you can just be direct and say, hey, that's nonsense, knock it off, go back and do your job. Or other people, you have to say, yeah, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I really don't think the person doesn't like you just because you wear green shoes. Like, you just have to know what the situation is, but you can't know the situation unless you know your people. And we have great tools and resources around culture to help support getting to know the people, managing performance that way as well.
We had a question come through in the chat. Marissa asked, what is your input on DISC, or learning about personalities and how people communicate? Making a fun staff activity. Do you have any certain recommendations for tools like that?
I love those ideas. I think getting to know your people is really important, as what Luke was just saying. It's really important to know your different people from different backgrounds, different generational situations. People value things differently. And so getting to know your employees, that'd be a great staff situation. Get everybody together. Everybody can take, the DISC is really great. There's some different color tests, your anagrams, some different things you can do. And then have an activity around that. So everybody, I've seen it before where everybody gets a different colored sticky note based on what they are, and they have to line up and kind of, get a visual aspect of where everybody fits on the line. But yeah, I think that's great. And I think getting to know each other is really important too. And that opens communication, but it also really builds trust. And then the conflict, can be resolved easier if you kind of understand that through your employees.
Perfect. Thank you guys for that input too. And my question is that probably about 4 years ago, I took a colors day class in DC, and I had reached out to that trainer who basically is just not available anymore. And so I'm really trying to find a resource to bring that person or that business in. Do you know anyone locally that does the colors or something similar?
I don't know anyone locally first offhand that is a certified trainer or something like that. And Alicia, you may, but we can certainly follow up, Marissa, afterwards to try and see what resources we have available, or who in the community has those connections and can definitely provide that. Another couple of tools, so the color thing, the DISC, there's one out there called Enneagrams. A lot of different organizations. Sometimes you see it within churches for just personalities and understanding that, but oftentimes it can be very effective in a workplace where it gets to know sort of the nuances of what motivates people, and then how do people act as a result of their motivation. So that may be an alternative as well. But if you want to reach out, we would definitely love to try and connect you with someone that can help you with that.
I definitely appreciate everybody's time and willing to take questions. My contact information was on the last slide. I'll send over my presentation. We also have it recorded. So if we have any questions afterwards, happy to help.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you, Luke. It's a great presentation. We will have the recorded version available on our website at fruitachamber.org. And then additionally, we'll be sharing Luke and Alicia's contact information to get in contact with them.